He was the greatest demon lord in history, but when he reincarnates into the future after 500 years, he finds that everyone is now stronger than him. The story begins in the world of Alniath, where there's a war between the humans and the immortals, and the fate of the world depends on the fight between the strongest of the two sides, the human hero Graham and the demon lord Veltol. It would usually be a useless fight since Veltol is immortal, but thanks to Graham's holy sword, he manages to deliver a blow that's strong enough to overcome Veltol's regeneration. Veltol praises him, wondering how he lost to a mortal, even though he's stronger than him in every way. Graham notes that Veltol thinks mortals are weak since they will all die, but he believes it's the thing that makes them strong. Veltol refuses to believe such a stupid thing led to his defeat, but Graham mentions it's the reason he won, even if he doesn't believe it. As his body turns to dust, Veltol promises to return, but Graham notes he will fight him again if that happens. In the present, Veltol awakens from his slumber, and a girl named Machina welcomes him back, revealing she has been waiting for him for 500 years. She apologizes for how she's dressed, but he tells her he doesn't mind, glad that she was able to perform his reincarnation ritual. He decides they should conquer Alniath once again, but she mentions the world he once ruled is long gone. She notes that 80 years ago, Alniath and Earth were caught in a catastrophe, which caused the two worlds to fuse. 90% of all people were wiped out, and the national governments stopped working, so cities started functioning as independent states, which led to a number of wars between them. But things are now relatively peaceful, and she mentions that Earth was advanced in technology, and after being combined with the magic from Alniath, it led to even greater advancement. She shows him the current state of the world, and he can't believe how far the mortals have come. A man almost bumps into him, but Machina pushes him out of the way. He can't believe the man so easily bumped into her, one of the 6 dark peers, so he decides to teach the mortals to fear them once more. He fires his magic into the sky, and it blows a hole in the clouds above, but the people just think he's an idiot using weather magic. An alarm goes off, and Machina reveals it's forbidden to use magic within the city, so she takes him and runs away. She notes that after his death, they agreed to a ceasefire with the humans, but after the fusing of the two worlds, the citizens of the Immortal Kingdom had to scatter across the world. After that, the major industries started hunting them, because the world collectively decided that immortals didn't deserve human rights, and they were treated like vile creatures. As the humans continued to become more advanced, they developed anti-immortal weapons, which almost wiped them all out. Veltol asks her what happened to the other 5 dark peers, so she notes that 3 of them went missing, and one of them, named Zenel, sacrificed himself so she could escape, because she was one of the only 2 people who knew how to revive him. Veltol realizes she hasn't mentioned Marcus, which startles her, and she tries changing the topic, asking him if he's thirsty. She tells him to stay put while she goes to buy him a drink, and as he waits, he notices lights floating around the area. They seem to be drawn to a girl, and she suddenly makes certain videos appear on all the screens in the city. She seems pleased with herself, and as she leaves, Veltol confronts her. He knows she was the one who changed all the screens, and she acts like she doesn't know what he's talking about, but he mentions he saw the fluctuations in the ether around her before all the screens changed. She's surprised he could tell that she was the one who did that by just looking at the ether, so she wonders who he is, but she doesn't believe him when he tells her he's the Demon Lord. Veltol doesn't understand how she was able to change the screens, but he feels she's a genius, which makes her blush, so she notes she just hacked the screens. Veltol mentions he's looking for Marcus, asking if she knows of him, so she points him towards a huge building, saying Marcus is the CEO of the company. So he goes to the building, and as he talks to the receptionist, Marcus's private secretary Kinohara mentions they've been waiting for him. As they ride the elevator, Kinohara sees him staring at her, so he notes he was just interested in the creature she has on her shirt, so she mentions it's the mascot of the Ishimara magic industry called Ishimari, and they plan to create a movement around him in the future. They arrive at the top of the building, where Marcus greets Veltol, but he thinks it's disrespectful for Marcus to stay seated in his presence. Marcus asks Veltol why he came to meet him, but Veltol notes he should be celebrating his return before asking questions. He tells Marcus to help him rebuild the Immortal Kingdom so he can once again rule the world, but Marcus starts to laugh, saying he's not going to help him. Veltol prepares to teach him a lesson, but Kinohara suddenly tries to slice him, so he jumps back to dodge it. Marcus tells her to stand down, and he notes Veltol has become weak, because in his prime, he wouldn't have needed to dodge the attack, so he isn't going to bow his head to him. He tells Veltol to leave, and he notes that if he begs, he might consider helping, which makes Veltol angry, so he prepares to teach him a lesson, but Marcus cancels his spell before he can do anything, which shocks him. Marcus starts to laugh, thinking Veltol must be wondering why a person like him, who can use magic without chanting, has been made powerless by someone without talent, so he reveals a device on his neck, saying it's the reason he has become stronger than him. Veltol has no clue what it is, so Marcus pulls up a video of him explaining the device. We learn the device is called a familia, and Marcus mentions there are 5 steps for activating magic, but with a familia, 3 of the steps are removed, allowing people from all races to use magic. Marcus notes that he made the familia so it can't be used by higher beings like Veltol, or else he would lose his advantage. Veltol tries to attack again, but Marcus breaks his spell once more, noting that even though Veltol's magic casting speed is fast, the familia is still faster, so without one, he'll always be too slow, because everyone has one implanted in their body. Veltol doesn't understand why Marcus is against him, so he says he has always hated him, because he was better than him at everything. Marcus summons a number of blood swords, shooting them at Veltol, and as he falls out of the window, Marcus thinks he's dead, so he plans to be the next demon lord. We see Veltol manage to survive, but he notes that his regeneration isn't what it used to be. He accidentally runs into a group of men, so he gets thrown in the garbage, and after Machina finds him, she apologizes for not telling him about Marcus's betrayal, but he notes that even if she had told him, he would have still gone to meet him. She takes him to her apartment building, and he's impressed thinking she has the whole building, but when she takes him to her tiny apartment, he thinks she's joking, but she notes it's all she can afford. He realizes she's been living like this while waiting for the last 500 years, so he hugs her and thanks her for her loyalty. We go back centuries to when Machina was about to be killed by her own people, because they think she's the reason for every bad thing that happened to them after finding out she's immortal. They throw stones at her, and as they push her into the volcano, Veltol suddenly saves her. He finds her beautiful, and he doesn't think she should die such a worthless death, so he tells her to come with him. In the present, Machina wakes Veltol for breakfast, and he's surprised by how delicious it is, which makes her happy. He asks her if she knows where the other immortals are, so she notes that a few of them managed to survive like her, but they have recently been going missing. She mentions she has lost contact with her close friends, and he wonders if the immortal hunting is still happening, but she notes that the hunts ended several decades ago. She mentions she went to her friend's room after they went missing, where she saw there was a struggle, and she found a note mentioning the immortal furnace. Veltol accidentally spills the tea, and he mentions he's still recovering from his injuries since his regeneration has slowed down. He knows he doesn't have his full power, since he couldn't use his magic to its full potential, and Machina notes that it's because the faith that served as a source of his power has greatly declined in the modern age. He knows that without others recognizing and turning their emotions towards him, his power of faith is lost, but he isn't worried since his life is eternal, and he simply needs to reclaim the faith. Machina suggests they go shopping, and she takes him to a market, where he's surprised because the shop seems empty, but she tells him to step on the 3D scanner, which will help them choose the best clothes for him. She feels bad since she can't afford the expensive things, but he notes his personality is such that even ordinary clothes will look good on him. She asks him if he has any preference in style, but he leaves it up to her, and she tells her familia to select the best option. It suggests a tracksuit, which he finds perfect, and he notices a design on the back, so he wonders what it means, and Machina tells him it's written in an old language, and it means the Demon Lord. As they leave the shop, Veltol stops her since they didn't pay for the clothes, but she tells him the payment was deducted automatically, which surprises him. He becomes curious about her familia, so she reveals that apart from its use in magic, it also helps in communication, shopping, and even gathering information. She mentions that unlike smartphones which have gone extinct, familia are more convenient since they don't need to be held physically. He starts touching her neck as he looks at it, and as she enjoys herself, she gets a notification that her heart rate is elevated, but she just ignores it. He wonders if it bothers her since it's attached to the nape of her neck, but she says she has grown used to it. She mentions how it has become an important part of them, but it doesn't necessarily improve one's life. Veltol thinks he should get a job, but Machina stops him, saying she can pick up more shifts to improve their living conditions. But he declines her offer because times have changed, so he can't stay idle while she works to provide them with all the necessities. He tells her he hasn't given up the idea of conquering the world, and Machina swears to serve him for as long as she lives. As Veltol is about to leave, she tries to join him, but he stops her since she has her own work, and in the unlikely scenario he can't get a job, they'll both be depending on her income. So she agrees to let him go, but she gives him a device which he can use for payment and to contact her in case of an emergency. As he looks at the device, he wonders what type of job he can get, but his stomach suddenly growls, and he notes it's the first time he has ever felt hungry, so the decline in his faith must be severe. He realizes he can't be choosy, and shouts that he needs a job since he's broke, saying he's willing to do anything. But a man stops him and tells him to visit the commercial guild if he needs work. He asks Veltol if he has a citizen ID, but he's clueless, so the man thinks he must be an illegal immigrant. He says that this is his turf, so Veltol apologizes and leaves, but the man hands him an application form and tells him to take it to the commercial guild. He can't guarantee it will help him get a job, but he thinks it's better than nothing. He guides Veltol toward the guild's location and warns him to stay away from any company under the Ishimaru group, because they have a reputation for exploiting their workers. Veltol soon arrives at the guild, where a clerk interviews him. Since he has no previous work experience, he only mentions his skills related to his role as the Demon Lord, like his experience creating dungeons and leading a nation. But the man tells him there are no positions for him, because they have a policy of only hiring people with the familia implants. After being rejected, Veltol returns to Machina, and he asks her if she thinks he isn't capable of doing anything in the present era because he's losing his confidence, but she tells him they are just fools that aren't capable of measuring his greatness. He asks her if she knows anyone who can offer them advice, and she says she knows a person, so he's happy that she has a friend. They meet Machina's friend Takahashi, and it turns out to be the girl Veltol met before. She realizes he wasn't lying about being the Demon Lord, because Machina always told her about him, but she never believed her stories. He wonders how they met, so Takahashi mentions they met online, but seeing Machina's reaction, she decides to spare the details. Veltol touches her familia since he finds it different from Machina's, which surprises her, so Machina explains he used his Sage Eyes ability, which allows him to use the flow of mana to understand the composition of objects that he touches. He mentions he has a general idea of what's going on inside the familia, but there's still a lot he can't analyze. After that, he asks Takahashi to help him find work, and she wonders if he has any preference, so he notes that he would prefer something that will make his existence known around the world. After considering his abilities and his lack of a familia, Takahashi suggests he become a streamer, so he wonders what that is. She tells them they broadcast themselves playing games, chatting and even singing, and they earn money from ads and donations. She assures him that it's easy, and she mentions she will even let him borrow her old stuff, but Machina isn't happy about it because she thinks he should find a more stable source of income. Takahashi mentions Veltol has a great voice and a pretty face, so everyone will love him, which even Machina can't deny. Machina is used to living alone in her apartment, so when she accidentally comes out of the shower with nothing on, she gets embarrassed and apologizes to Veltol, but he tells her there's nothing to be ashamed of, and he even praises her physique. Takahashi arrives with the equipment, and as she assembles everything, Machina is worried, but Takahashi tells her to trust in her best friend, because she has already planned everything. She tells Veltol to check out his new setup, and she tries telling him how to use the controller, but he uses his Sage Eyes to learn how it works. He selects a game, and Takahashi worries because it's like Dark Souls, but she thinks it shouldn't be too difficult for him due to his powers, but he dies almost immediately. After losing several times in a row, Takahashi thinks he sucks, but Veltol notes it's fine since he isn't used to playing on the controller. Machina wonders if their plan is falling apart, but Takahashi tells her it's the opposite, since his perfect personality will contrast with his poor gameplay. Takahashi thinks they need to come up with a good intro, because out of the millions of streamers in the world, only a few are making money, so she thinks he needs a unique catchphrase that will leave its mark on people. Makina suggests quoting something from his war declarations, and after seeing it, Takahashi thinks it's alright, and says they can improve it later on. Takahashi tells him to stream every day even if no one is watching. She also tells Makina to stay out of the room while he's streaming so she doesn't get caught on the camera, because they can't have people thinking she's his girlfriend. After that, Veltol streams every day, and his subscribers slowly start growing, but not everyone is a fan of his gameplay. So he gets troll comments, but he isn't affected by them since both positive and negative emotions toward him increases his power, but Makina struggles to tolerate such disrespectful remarks about her master. Veltol eventually reaches 1 million subscribers, so he decides to play a new game, but while he streams, there's someone that spies on Makina. When he finally clears the game, one of his viewers comments on how he was raging, but he notes that if that were the case, the whole world would have ended. After that, he goes out for a walk, and Makina tells him she'll have dinner ready by the time he gets back. As he walks through the streets, he's shocked when he suddenly sees the hero Graham among the homeless people. We go back to before Graham became a hero, and we see him taking care of his sister. He leaves to gather herbs for her, but his father stops him and hands him a sword so he can protect himself. He starts gathering the herbs, but on his way back, he sees an army of dragon folk, knowing they are led by one of Veltol's generals, and he's surprised by why they're all the way out there. But when he gets back to his house, he's horrified to find it burned to the ground along with his entire family, so he swears to get his revenge on Veltol. Back in the present, Veltol takes Graham to a noodle shop and mentions that the food is amazing, but Graham seems uninterested, and simply agrees with whatever he says. Graham mentions it's strange that he's eating with the man who killed his family and allies, and Veltol notes that he feels the same way, because several of his allies were killed by Graham, but he no longer feels hatred towards him. He asks Graham how he's still alive, and Veltol wonders if he has somehow become immortal, which would go against everything he believed in, but Graham mentions that it isn't the case, because after defeating him, the goddess Meldia rewarded him with eternal youth, but he's still a human. Graham tells him that after the war against the immortals, a civil war broke out, and he was ordered to kill those he had sworn to protect, but once peace was restored, he became their next target and he was exiled from his own country. He wonders why Veltol wanted to rule the world, and he reveals it was for peace, which shocks Graham. He notes that almost all immortals were once mortals, and there isn't much difference between them. So as one of the strong, he planned to rise above all of them and rule over the weak to create a peaceful world. Graham disagrees with his idea of peace through domination, and leaves after thanking him for the food, but he's glad they had the chance to talk. As Veltol returns to the apartment, he hears a familiar voice, and notices Takahashi arguing with an ogre in the alley. He prepares to beat her up, but Veltol grabs his arm and stops him, telling the ogre he will give him a chance to leave. But the ogre remembers how he beat Veltol before, so he thinks he's just acting like a hero in front of a girl. He threatens to kill Veltol, and Takahashi tells him to run, but he mentions he wants to test his new powers since he has gathered over 1 million subscribers. The ogre tries to punch him, but he stops it easily with his hand. The ogre counters with a wind blast, which breaks his arm, but he instantly heals it using his magic and flicks the ogre into the trash. Veltol mocks him for being too weak to even serve as a good test, and Takahashi rushes to thank him. He wonders why she was with the ogre, so she mentions he was supposed to be her bodyguard, but he started asking her to double their agreed payment. She notes she has found a better bodyguard, and she offers to pay Veltol for his help. Meanwhile, Marcus asks Kinohara if there's any news of the rats sniffing around the immortal furnace, but she tells him that they have been eliminated, and everything is going as planned. After that, we see Veltol and Takahashi outside a warehouse, where she needs to steal an item, and his job is to ensure her safety. But as she checks her system to confirm the details, he rushes in and breaks the door, stumbling upon a Yakuza operation. He asks Takahashi if the cube on the table is what she's looking for, but she's surprised by how he's communicating with her since he doesn't have a familia. He mentions he reproduced the familia's ether communication using magic, and he notes that there are only a few enemies, so he will just take them out and grab the target, but Takahashi tells him to avoid killing them. He performs his stream introduction, but they don't recognize him and think he's mocking them, so he decides to test his powers on them. They start shooting at him, so he uses his magic to create a barrier around his body, which allows him to easily deflect the bullets. He tells them it's his turn and rushes toward them, knocking them out one by one. As he dashes at the boss, he tries to shoot Veltol, but Takahashi hacks into his familia and overwrites his perception, so he hits his partner instead. Veltol finishes him off with a kick, and Takahashi is impressed by his skills. She prepares to collect the cube, but Veltol senses something and stops her from approaching. Veltol is suddenly attacked, and the enemy seems to be cloaked with invisibility, so Veltol uses the gun to blast the cloak off, revealing a giant mech. Takahashi recognizes it as a 4th generation of Majino gear, which is used by the special forces of the city guard, so she wonders how the Yakuza got it. Takahashi tells him they should leave, since it will be impossible to defeat it, but he thinks it will be a good test. The mech activates its weapon and starts shooting at Veltol, but he dodges it and jumps into the air to fire his magic at it. He manages to land a hit, but he knows it won't be enough to take out the mech, since he isn't at his full power. He realizes he has reached his limit from the faith of 1 million subscribers, but he thinks he can still win, and he takes out his sword. He dashes toward the mech, which also converts its gun into a sword. They block each other's attacks, and Veltol encourages it to show its full power, so it gets serious, and it suddenly cuts off his arm and slices off his head. The pilot reports back to the headquarters that the target has been eliminated, but they're shocked when they see he is still alive. Veltol mentions he's impressed, but tells them they lack battle experience, because they let their guard down just because they cut off his head. He takes out his demonic sword Virmal, and the mech is frozen in fear. Veltol cuts off its arms and legs, saying it was a good fight, but they were unfortunate to be up against the Demon Lord. The pilot reports that he failed to eliminate the target, and he ends his own life to avoid being interrogated. Veltol is surprised at the ability of modern weapons to enhance a person's power to such a level, and he finds the new era terrifying, but Takahashi thinks he's even scarier, since he defeated a Majino gear by himself. She notices the Ishimaru logo on it, and believes that the Yakuza could never get their hands on such tech, so the job might be more dangerous than she anticipated. Veltol wonders what the cube is, so she notes it's a data storage device made from mithril, and she needs to check what's inside it. They open it and find a list of names, which Veltol recognizes as all of his immortal subjects, but Makina's name is luckily not included. Takahashi tries to contact her client Iju for more information, but she's unable to reach him. She tells Veltol they'll need to visit him in person, and he says that since he's the king, it's his responsibility to take care of the immortals. They soon arrive outside a large apartment building, and Takahashi uses her hacking to get past security. They enter the elevator, and Veltol asks her to let him press the buttons since he likes pressing them, which she finds strange, but she notes they can't go directly to the 13th floor, and they must follow a specific sequence of buttons. They eventually reach the 13th floor, but Takahashi stops him from entering, saying there are traps. He uses his powers and notes that all the magical and physical traps are disarmed, so she's surprised, and he explains his duties as the Demon Lord included the construction and maintenance of dungeons, so finding traps is easy for him. They reach outside Iju's apartment, and Takahashi rings the bell, but no one answers. Veltol realizes the door is open, which Takahashi finds strange, because Iju isn't the careless type. They smell something rotten, and Veltol realizes something isn't right, so he thinks they should proceed with caution. Takahashi finds Iju's body, and Veltol recognizes him from when he met him before, even though he looked different. So Takahashi notes he was always disguised as a homeless person whenever he went out to gather information. Veltol analyzes the body, and concludes he was killed a few days ago. Takahashi thinks it must have been his enemies, but Veltol believes it to be the work of a professional. She thinks someone might have hired an assassin, but his familia has also been destroyed, so Takahashi thinks the real goal might have been to destroy the information on his familia. Veltol thinks the only lead they have left is the list, but Takahashi tells him they may have another option. She reveals Iju was an information broker and an ether hacker, so he must have kept a backup of his familia, which she finds inside a hidden drawer. She connects it to the computer, and there is surprisingly no password, but all the files seem corrupted, but Veltol notes that the folders are arranged in a specific order to hide the real file. They manage to find a video where we see Iju revealing that the whole city relies on the ether reactor, which is running off the lives of innocent people. The reactor draws ether from the lines running through the ground, powered by the planet's core, that convert energy into magic and electricity. But to power the entire city, the reactor must sit on 10 ether lines, but it only has 2. So because of this shortage, generating power for the whole city is impossible, so it's why the Immortal Furnace project was started. The furnace burns immortals, converting them into ether for the city, with a single immortal's soul able to produce more ether than 1,000 mortals. According to Iju's sources, they hired the homeless and outsiders to build the project, and they were all killed once the furnace was complete. He mentions how the people at Ishimaru call these immortals firewood, and the first immortal that was fed to the furnace was the Dark Pirzenal. The immortal hunts were just an excuse to gather immortals, but he believes the company is running low on firewood, which is why they were buying a list of immortals from the Yakuza Guild. He mentions that once they run out of usable firewood, the entire city will be affected, but he can't allow them to continue. He notes that he's saved all the data there, leaving it up to whoever watches the video to decide what to do, adding that the only one who can resolve the problem would have been the legendary Demon Lord. Veltol wonders if they should leak the information, but Takahashi thinks it will just be taken down and she will be killed like Iju. Veltol thinks that as the king of the immortals, it's his responsibility, so she doesn't need to trouble herself with it. She notes that they should at least inform the officials about the body, and Veltol thinks he should also tell Machina about the situation, but he isn't able to reach her, so he worries that something has happened to her. We see Machina in the apartment as she thinks about what to make for dinner, but she suddenly gets a visit from Marcus, and there's a huge explosion. He calls her cold for attacking him on sight, and we see Machina in her combat form. They fire their blades at each other, but Machina charges through the smoke, and she blows off his arm, but he instantly regenerates it, and he summons even more swords. Machina protects herself with a barrier, so Marcus tries to blow her up, but we see that she's okay. Kinohara tries to attack her, but she manages to get away. She decides to take Kinohara out, but Marcus cancels her spell, and Kinohara stabs her from behind. She tells Marcus he should have disabled Machina's Familia from the beginning, but he notes he couldn't help having some fun. He gets bricked seeing her on the ground, and Machina wonders what he did to her, so he reveals he shut down her Familia. She thinks it should be impossible to hack since her Familia was standalone, but he reveals that all Familia have a back door, and using his new advanced Familia, he can shut any of them down, so there's no one who can defeat him. After that, we see Veltol as he gets back to the apartment, wondering what happened to Machina. They realize there was an explosion, and Takahashi hacks into the delivery drones around the area, so they find out Marcus was the one behind it. They see him taking Machina away, and Takahashi realizes she's being taken to the furnace. Veltol prepares to save her, but Takahashi tells him he can't just charge in, because the reactor area will be protected by lots of Magino mechs. She notes that she can't do much in a fight, but Veltol realizes there's someone who can help them. He ends up finding Graham, and he kneels to him to ask for his help. He explains how immortals are being burnt to power the city, asking Graham to help save Machina. Graham notes that if he destroys the reactor, it could also mean the end of the city, so he asks Veltol if he plans on killing everyone just to save one person. But Veltol decides he will save both Machina and the city since he's the Demon Lord, and he's the one who will rule over everything. He asks Graham to help him once more, so Graham agrees, but mentions he's only doing it to save a woman that's been kidnapped, because it's his job as the hero to protect the weak. Takahashi guides them to an underground area that can lead them to the reactor, but Veltol thinks they don't have the time to clear a dungeon, but Graham uses an original skill he created to easily map out the dungeon, and Veltol tells him he has no pride as an adventurer, mentioning how much effort he would put into making his dungeons in the past, so they start to argue, but Takahashi tells them to focus, reminding them that Machina's life is on the line. Graham detects no traps, so he thinks they can take the shortest path to the reactor. Veltol asks Takahashi if she's ready, but she notes that it's taking longer than expected, so they might need to buy her more time. They approach the furnace on an elevator, but they lose their signal to Takahashi as they get closer to the reactor. Graham notes that Veltol has gotten stronger, so he thinks Graham is being sarcastic, mentioning how much weaker he is. But Graham tells him his past self would have never been strong enough to have bowed to him for the sake of one of his vassals. They arrive at the reactor, and Kinohara is surprised they actually showed up. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.